The Hangout on Air is live. And the episode number 2, the first guested episode of itManageCast is recording live on the interwebs.
A guested episode. I don't know if I know that term. I understood what you said, so communication happened.
That's fantastic. It's as opposed to a droning monologue of my voice.
The unguested episodes.
Yes. All right. So I am going to kick in the intro, and then we'll get rolling.
Welcome to itManageCast, the podcast for busy IT professionals who want news, reviews, and interviews on the topics of IT operations, service, and project management. So put your head in the cloud for the next 30 minutes and join your host, Jason Kennedy, for this week's episode of itManageCast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to episode 2 of itManageCast, the podcast for busy IT professionals who would like news, reviews, and interviews on IT service, operations, and project management. I am Jason Kennedy, and I will be your host today and most days that you listen to this podcast as we explore some real-life experiences in database conversion in mid to small-sized IT shops. And to help discuss this topic, I am joined today by a gentleman who knows a lot about this topic. That is Mr. Chris Umphenour. Chris, welcome to our show, and thank you for joining me.
Jason, it's always a pleasure to talk with you about all things IT.
Fantastic. And listeners, before we get into today's topic, I would just like to take the opportunity to do some, as it's called, quick full disclosure, as they say. Chris podcasts with me on the weekly geocaching podcast, Caching in the Northwest. We'll put a link to that in our show notes. And he has been kind enough to be our very first official guest on itManageCast to help us kick off this series. So thanks, Chris. Much appreciated.
Well, everything you said there, Jason, was true, but I do have to warn listeners here, not every geek has a fully functioning podcast studio available to them in their house. So we do podcast together on a weekly basis, and I have to say, Jason, that you've brought a lot to our little regional podcast. So I'd like to thank you for the effort and the organization you dedicate each and every week.
Well, thank you very much. The Mutual Admiration Society will continue on after the podcast. That's great. All right. Hey, before we get into the meat of things, I would like to play a little game with you, and the intent here is to help our listeners get to know you a little better. The game is called 5 Quick Questions. I'm going to, Chris, if you're willing to play, I'm going to ask you 5 brief questions and ask you to provide me with a quick answer. The first one off the top of your head for each question.
You know, let's do this. Since I am the first guest on the show, I am going to set the bar, and I'm going to set it high.
Excellent. Excellent. I love that. I love the confidence. All right. So question number 1. Favorite vacation spot?
You know, that's really a tough call. I've taken a couple of RV trips in the past years, and I have to say the time with the family is really nice. You know, when you've got them locked into an RV going down the road, they can't go anywhere, and you're forced to communicate, to talk, and really get to know your kids anymore, and better, I mean. Now, if you do have to pin me down, I'd have to say Steamboat Rock State Park in my home state of Washington.
Fantastic. And question number 2, pen or pencil?
It's always a pencil for me.
All right. That sounds very definitive. I'm going to be curious to dig into that one a little more sometime. All right. Number 3, Apple, Windows, or Linux?
Well, work has pushed me into the world of Windows, and that's where I feel the most comfortable. So, Windows.
Awesome. You know what? I'm just reading that question, and I have looked at that question about 30, 40 times, and I just now realized that I actually have a product brand name, a OS, and a group of OSs, so it's really not a well-written question, but so I guess it should be Mac, Windows, or choose your flavor of Linux. I don't know. Oh well. You know what? Everybody knows what I mean, so I'm just going to leave it. All right. Number 4, last book you read.
The last book I read was Quiet, The Power of Introverts. And unfortunately, I can't come up with the author, but it was a great book on how introverts really do push the mechanism of business forward.
Fascinating. That does sound like an interesting read. All right. 5th and final question. If, and we certainly hope this never happens, but if your workplace was burning down and you could only take one thing with you, what would it be?
Jason, we have been doing some disaster recovery planning, and so things like this actually come up. That's a tough one, and I think I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to grab a backpack that has a bunch of things in it. You know, my most important personal possessions.
There you go. Way to think outside the box on the question. That's great. All right. So that's great. Hopefully our listeners get to know a little bit more about you. And I like to try and help our listeners feel that our guests are people too, and not just boxes of knowledge, although they're people who are filled with boxes of knowledge. So that all said, our listeners today are tuning in because they want to learn some tips and tricks or just get some general advice on keeping their head above water when they're running a database conversion project in a small to mid-size IT shop. So for the sake of argument, I'm going to define the size of the IT shop based on, let's say, the number of people in it, because it's really, and there's so many different factors you could use to define the size of your IT shop. So let's say contractors, volunteers, staff, etc., somewhere between 1 and 10 people is what, in my eyes, would constitute the size of shop we're talking about. So based on that, Chris, perhaps you can fill us in just a little bit about your shop.
Well, we would have to put ourselves in the small category. While our business is pushing us towards enterprise-level solutions, there really, right now, is only 2.5 people in our shop. So just in the past few weeks, I've been given a little help, that a database coordinator, if you will, and that's that half person. That extra help has made a big difference in my daily work schedule. Prior to that, it's been 2 of us for over 10 years.
Wow.
So we manage 16, it varies, 16 or so servers. Most of them are virtual now. The network, the internet hardware, network storage, wireless, backup, desktop support, contracts and purchasing, databases, printers, telephones. Basically, if it has flashing lights and it plugs in, we manage it.
That's amazing. That is a lot of work. Now, out of curiosity, because it's something else that we're certainly going to be talking about in future episodes of this show, the 16 servers that you manage, most of them virtual, are they on-premise? Are they cloud? Is it a hybrid, a mixture?
They're all on-premise.
Excellent. Okay, good to know. So thank you very much. That's helpful for us to all get a sense of the size of shop we're talking about and the level of responsibility and how busy you gentlemen are there. The 2 and the half. Sorry, I would giggle when I hear about fractions of a person. But we know that's in our industry. It's the way we enumerate these things. But that sounds like that is a lot on the plate for you guys. How do you manage that much workload? So, for instance, do you use any scheduling systems or automation or scripting?
We use scripting and scheduling wherever we can. We have to, with only a basic 2-person shop. It's amazing to me how much our network has grown in the last 10 years. But along with that, the tools of management have grown right alongside it to help us keep up with all this. So the other big advantage in the 2-person shop is our personal friendship. Jim and I have been friends for over 25 years. It was long before we started working together. So with that friendship comes quick forgiveness of mistakes and a kind of shorthand communication that we can use with each other that allows us to work as more than 2 people.
I have experienced that shorthand communication, and it seems to often take part in movie references.
Oh, movie references, exactly. Especially Men in Black. Watch Men in Black again, but think about managing your IT world, and suddenly that movie takes on a whole new premise. I'm just throwing
That's fantastic. I love it. All right. Anything else about the shop you wanted to share?
No, that's pretty much it to start with.
Okay, that sounds great.
I'm sure we'll
So
talk more.
fantastic. So let's shift now onto database conversions. I understand from conversations you and I have had that you've been up to your eyeballs or armpits or whatever bodily part we want to use for the expression in a database conversion project recently. And without getting you into any specifics that may get you into trouble in the workplace, what can you share with us about the scope and the expected deliverables of the project?
Well, certainly. I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast deals with databases in one way or another. Now, I will tell you, I work for a large, some say mega church with an attached school. So when I arrived 10 years ago, there was an AS400 in a closet that housed our database. And it was pretty much a closed system. Only a few people had access to the database. And get this, you had to wait until Thursdays when the contract programmer came in to get your reports.
Wow.
So we moved from that to a dedicated church database. So I kind of call it a database with training wheels. It was, well, I'll get into that in a little bit. There was very little configure out of the box, and management was a breeze. But we grew out of that in about 6 years. And the next step was a full SQL database sitting behind a web server, as we tend to see everywhere these days.
Right.
So, while this database was by the same software company, it's a night and day difference. So there's a staff portal, a mobile-friendly portal, a public portal, all to manage. We could have dozens of people from all over the globe in our database at one time. So I'll tell you right up front, I have a hardware background. I'm not a database administrator. So setting up security alone was enough to make me want to pull out my hair. And I think I did. I earned these gray hairs, by the way. I'll let you know.
Fair enough.
So to give you an idea, we're working with 16 years of history. That's 10 years from the AS400 and 6 years from that. Do I say current database or our previous database?
The one that you've just migrated from.
Yeah. And, it may not seem like a lot, but we're dealing with 80,000 records. So
it's a decent size. It's a decent sized database, 80,000 records, and certainly with the history on there and the importance of it, you can't take a chance on losing the data. I would imagine any of our listeners, regardless of whether they're in finance, social services type work, public sector, private sector, regardless of where you're working, you don't want to lose the data in your database. So
exactly.
It's a big challenge, and it sounds like a big challenge you had, and it sounds like you didn't have a lot of team to work with on that project with you. So how did you go about the planning for the work of this project?
Well, Jay, we were blessed in this area. As I said earlier, the two databases are from the same company. They're two different product lines, but within the same company. So
Right.
There was a very well-defined migration path. And along with that, they had unlimited tech support, and I needed it.
Well, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it really does. They set up a Basecamp. Are you familiar with Basecamp? They set up
I am,
Basecamp.
but in case our listeners aren't, why don't you just share what that is quickly?
Basecamp is a portal set up that only a limited number of people have access to. So it's a bulletin board of types. You can have multiple threaded messages to talk back and forth. So a Basecamp account was set up for me, and I had access to trainers, techs, IT staff, and data conversion specialists. This really was a lifesaver. I could ask questions to targeted people instead of going out to a forum and asking everyone, hey, how do you do this? I could target it to the people that I was looking for within the organization. And I know you're going to understand when I say this. That way I didn't have to hope that I got that one tech on the phone who really knows what they're talking about. You've been there, haven't you?
Yeah.
You call and you go, I didn't want this tech. I'm not going to get the answer I want. Should I just hang up and call back?
I think all of us have. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so that's helpful. That's really helpful to help us understand the challenge and the planning that went on there. So through everything we've discussed thus far and your experiences in this database conversion migration project, what would you say was the biggest challenge that you had to undertake in facing the project?
Well, clearly, it was my inexperience. Like I said, I'm not a database administrator, and I had a huge learning curve to tackle. And I'm still not a database administrator. I don't know if I'm getting this across clearly. I kind of consider it the equivalent of building a website, say with WordPress, and calling yourself a web designer.
Isn't that what we do?
Exactly, that's what we do. Hey, look at this. I'm a web designer. Here's my websites. You're dabbling. You're not a true web designer. I'm not a true DBA. So, being able to jump in and understand the structures and the tables and, I get all that. I understand that idea, but actually going through and managing them is a whole different ball of wax.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. And myself, like you, background definitely an infrastructure guy. I understand databases. I've done some work on SQL, supporting some SQL databases back in the day, even for a fairly large-sized credit union. But actually getting in and tweaking with it or managing a database conversion, that's different than the operation of the system.
Mm-hmm. I am not very good at writing SQL queries. However, you give me one that works and I can edit it to make it do what I want.
Nice.
But don't expect me to write it from scratch.
Fair enough. I will not ask you to do that.
Whew, good. I thought there was going to be a test.
There is, but it's something different. Don't worry.
Okay.
All right. So, Chris, if you had the opportunity to plan this project again, what would you have done differently?
I would have demanded, and I use that word strongly, I would have demanded more time to implement the change. In a church our size, or other churches our size, had a team of somewhere between 3 and 7 people, and it took 6 to 8 months for them to work through it. So I did it alone in right about a 6-month time frame. Now, I'm not saying that to puff myself up. I'm saying that to show my ignorance. Okay? I love being the hero and fixing whatever's broken. And this was no different. But this conversion process was a full-time job on top of my current full-time job. And a lot of things had to slide in order for me to meet the deadlines for the database. And right now I'm facing a huge backlog of work that I'm attempting to catch up on. Now, just because the database conversion is over doesn't mean the work is done. I have to work with each department and go through specialized training to help them get the most out of this new database. Then I have to go about setting up new structures and moving data around to fit the way they want to work.
Wow. So if I understand this correctly, you have needed to take on the role of systems administrator, project manager, DBA, and now change management / trainer.
And trainer, yeah. There was one point where they delayed. A delay was put on me for a month, and during that time they said, "Well, since you've got this free time, will you teach classes?" Free time. You have no idea what's going on here.
Wow.
So I did. I taught a series of classes. Here's how the database is going to look and how you're going to use it.
Wow, amazing. Glad you've survived.
Skin of my teeth.
No kidding. Well, given that and given your experience, if you could leave our listener, the IT professional, if our listener is faced with a similar challenge, if they have to handle a database migration project coming up in their future, what one piece of advice would you make sure they have?
Now, this is coming from my heart, and I'm going to tell you, don't be afraid to ask for help. It doesn't show weakness, but it shows that you have enough strength to know what you don't know. IT in this day and age, you can't know everything. And we tend to be very compartmentalized. We have deep knowledge in certain areas, but not a wide breadth of knowledge across everything IT. You just simply can't do it anymore.
Yeah, agreed.
So use your existing contacts and find out who has done something like this before in your field and leverage their knowledge and their experience.
Great advice. And based on some of the other comments you've made throughout the interview here, would I be correct if I was as bold to make a statement of another important thing is not only don't be afraid to ask for help, but don't be afraid to really communicate clearly with the business area leaders that are asking for this database conversion to happen, and get them to pony up the money for more assistance to get that help.
Mm-hmm. This database was not an inexpensive project to start with. We're talking, six figures to get it going. And when they've spent that much money, they're expecting results quickly.
Right.
And, I worked hard to set expectations. Hey, this isn't going to be a quick process.
So when they were looking at the budgeting, they were looking at software licensing costs, hardware costs, things like that, but either consulting or your time wasn't really factored into that?
No. I'm an employee. My time is already accounted for in the budget.
Right.
And the consulting, a lot of that was covered through my access to the trainers and the techs.
Okay.
For instance, in this whole data conversion process, the company sent out trainers twice, 2 separate times. One to what they called a discovery period of, let us look at your data and how you expect to use it.
Yeah.
And then we can tell you, here's how it fits best into our database program. And then another trainer came out and really did, the idea was he comes out just as we're about to go live, trains everybody for that week while I'm in the background scurrying on my hamster wheel to get everything up and going. And we can the users can walk out, use the database within a couple of days of their training, and it's up and running. So it was nice to have those kind of resources available to me.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Chris, I want to thank you very much for your insights and joining us for this conversation about database migrations. You're more than welcome to hang in through a little review of some recent press release around a ViewSonic product release that I thought would be interesting to share with our listeners, and our tip of the week.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to hear what's going on.
All right. Well, first of all, I wanted to just share something that I found kind of interesting. It came a press release that came into my inbox not too long ago, and it's from ViewSonic Corporation, and they were announcing that their SD-A235 Citrix Zen Mobile Smart Display was available to enhance your virtual desktop environments. This device is a capacitive touch screen, 23-inch LED IPS panel, 1080p resolution, comes pre-installed with the Citrix Works Home app for easy enrollment and management for a Zen mobile environment. It also includes HDMI in and out, USB connectivity, an SD reader, RJ45 and Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and an integrated 2-megapixel webcam and speakers. So it really is an all-in-one secured, locked-down desktop solution if you are a Citrix shop. And it just sounded to me like a really slick product. I don't know if Chris... Sorry, go ahead.
I think this is going to be my new tablet. I think I can carry around a 23-inch tablet with me. I don't think it'll be a hassle at all.
Well, on the topic of tablets, this thing actually does run Jelly Bean 4.3, the Android operating system.
There you go.
And I just think that's really cool. So, it's just a really slick device. I think it's the price tag is around $700 US dollars. To So not bad. It's just sounded like a really
that was less expensive than I thought.
Yeah, because I mean, you're talking about a as you said, a 23-inch tablet, but that has that it's ready to go and secured for a secured Citrix Zen mobile environment. So I thought that was.
Now you laugh about carrying it around, but I believe I've seen some women's handbags that could hold a 23-inch tablet.
Awesome. Well, on that note, before we move into talking about our itManageCast tip of the week, I did want to say that any of our listeners, if you have any news or events that are coming up that you'd like shared on our show, so please make sure to send it to us at itmanagecast@gmail.com. We'll be happy to share it on the show. So with that, let's move into our tip of the week. And our tip of the week for this week is related to IT project management. So I know Chris's advice is maybe coming a little late, but maybe next time.
I'll keep it in the back of my head.
All right. One thing I wanted to iterate, and this comes from me having a very long career in both IT project management and IT operations management, and it's all about any of our IT folks who are participating in IT projects to remind them frequently that it's all about the documentation. In fact, when it comes to the transition to operations at the end of any IT project, it's almost entirely about documentation. I think, Chris, you can appreciate that the busy folks the analysts and technicians, they don't necessarily want to make up the time to write up formal systems or application documentation, and often they aren't really even sure where to start. What is it that the PM is asking for? So they'll often throw out, and I've heard this many a time, well, it's self-documenting, so don't worry about it.
There is no such thing as self-documentation. We often talk about this, since it's a two-person IT shop, if we go out to lunch and get hit by a bus, who knows our passwords? Who knows where, the databases actually live? I know the management above me knows nothing of what I do. So
absolutely.
It's a really good topic to bring up.
Thanks. And you're right on with that. There is no such thing as self-documenting, and when we say self-documenting, what technicians and analysts are thinking about, if anybody's listening to this podcast comes from more of a leadership or project management background, and they've heard the term and they thought, okay, well, they know what they're doing, they should be okay. What they mean is what that technician is saying to you is anyone else who's going to work on this should be able to read the config files. That's what they're saying. So and figure it out from there. But Chris, you're absolutely right. That doesn't necessarily mean that they know where things are located or have the appropriate credentials or how to obtain those credentials. So really, I share in my experience, this is not, self-documentation is not an effective and efficient type of transition to operations documentation. And that technical team, they're busy and they're going to have other projects or operational on their plate, and they just may not have experience in writing documentation.
No,
so
you're exactly right. It's hard to say, hold on, I have to put this urgent job aside to do something that is truly important.
Yes, yeah. In the meantime, the cell phone's buzzing on the hip, and yeah, servers are catching on fire, and whatever else happens in our workplaces. Yeah, I get it. So my advice would be for the project manager to specifically call out systems and application, operational, and support documentation as a project task and ensure that time is built into the project to see this done.
I love it. Love it.
Thanks. So listeners, if you have any IT project or operations management tips or tricks that you'd like to share with the rest of the listeners, please send them to us. Don't send them to us. Send them to us via Twitter at itManageCast or email them to us at itmanagecast@gmail.com, and I will personally guarantee that you will get full credit when we share them in an upcoming episode. So folks, that about wraps up today's show. And Chris, it has been fantastic speaking to you and fun to speak to you about something other than geocaching.
It's amazing. We do have other parts of our lives. We just don't get to talk about them on a regular basis.
Absolutely. But I do want to sincerely thank you for joining me as our first ever official guest on the itManageCast. I can't even say, it's late at night, folks, for me, on the itManageCast podcast. And I really look forward to having you back.
Well, thank you, Jason, and I look forward to coming back. This is a great forum to talk about and learn about different aspects of IT. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to itManageCast. We hope you enjoyed spending this time with us, and we really want to hear from you. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at itManageCast, and email us your thoughts and opinions at itmanagecast@gmail.com. To join us for our live recordings, follow us on Google+ and YouTube. This show is Creative Commons Copyright 2015 by Jason J. Kennedy.
And that is a show.
There you go. That was fun.
It's a lot of fun. I'm gonna stop the broadcast so that our YouTube episode is done, and we can chat offline. Thank you for watching, folks.
Good night.